Streaming live around the world, this is Paper Cuts with Brad and Jay.
I'm the one you love. I'm Jay. Thanks so much for stopping by. Over there's Brad. It's his show.
It's his show. That's why I'm the host, and we just love Jay.
Like, I don't know if I'm just dumbfounded, amazed, shocked, or what. God, you just suck the life out of me. It just feels like
you've got a lot grayer since we started this.
I have. I know. I have.
Joining us tonight, New York Times bestselling author Frank Bill, along with special co-host Meagan Lucas.
We are live.
Well, hello there, beautiful people. How are we? Everyone good?
Oh, thanks,
Great.
Jay.
Welcome
thanks for
back.
the compliment, man.
Welcome back to the hottest show in the world. Oh, I'm not on that show. Am I? Here's Paper Cuts. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. I'm Jay. That's Brad over there doing the control board, all that stuff.
Somewhere.
Big show for you tonight. In fact, so big, we had to call in reinforcements.
We had
to bring in the honorary member of Paper Cuts to help us out with this one. We're not worthy. She's gracing us with her presence once again. Everyone, welcome back to the show. Meagan Lucas taking over a little bit tonight. We're going to sit back and let her do all the work.
Oh, yeah.
She's got all the great questions. Me and Jay will just throw some stuff in every now and then.
Look, so how'd you start writing? No. So, all right. The reason we brought her in, of course, we needed reinforcements because we have the writer of DONNYBROOK, the writer of Crimes in Southern Indiana. And this new one hits the streets. Everyone, go ahead and show them. That's what we do here.
Show them off.
May 9th, Back to the Dirt. Welcome to the program, Frank Bill. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Frank, what's going on, sir?
Hey.
Appreciate it.
What are you normally doing on a Friday night besides talking to two dopes with microphones?
This is my second Friday off because working in a factory, we switch every 90 days. We either work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and off Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, or vice versa. So I'm now back on the weekend shifts of being off work. So I was in Oklahoma and Mississippi last week. So
nice.
That was our
your night off.
That's my first night off. Weekends don't mean anything to me. I mean, I was on I got bumped to the warehouse for like 5 years and I hated it. It was a Monday through 8 hours a day, and I got Saturdays and Sundays off. I'm not a kid anymore, and I don't have kids. So
yeah, once you become an adult, a certain age, weekends, trying to be off on a weekend.
Well, I mean, really getting 3 or 4 days off a week, working the plant's a whole lot easier than for the birds, man.
Right.
I could care less. I mean, that's a lot of people are like, what? And I'm like, dude, I'm not going out on the weekends and drinking and waiting on Saturday and then nursing myself back to health for Saturday night. I mean, that's what I do. I mean,
we all can't live that life Meagan has every weekend.
Right.
It's like,
right.
Yeah, that's just not my cup of tea.
So congrats on the book, by the way. I think the three of us, finished it today.
Well, finished it today, yeah.
Doing a little bit of a group chat back and forth. And I think the consensus was that we enjoyed the hell out of it, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Yep.
You guys on the spot here.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. It's pretty dark. It's probably my most mature thing I've written as far as all the pieces coming together and being a much. It's not as crazy as some of the things I've written. It's probably the most personal too, as far as where a lot of the stories.
There is a negative review. I saw Goodreads and I saw
Jay. We are 4 minutes into the show. He's already bringing up negative stuff.
He knows what I'm talking about because he responded to the review, right?
Yeah, because it wasn't a review. It was just a stupid comment. If this is Frank Bill, something
exactly
worse. What happened?
And so I was looking at it today.
If you didn't work in a factory, I know anything about military and your family, it's not for you. Why would you even comment?
Like I wanted to comment back to him too, but that person's got one review and that was it, or one. I was doing some research for the show, and like, are you kidding me? You got these 4s and 5s right here, and this dude's over here like.
Jay, your new nickname, Jay, is Negative Nancy.
There was no substance to what he said. I'm just
exactly yes. So see, Frank knew what I was talking about because he was responding to the person. So
you could have brought it up later in the show, Jay.
I don't respond to this because I don't respond to anything like that. And I'm just like, this wasn't even a review. What a moron! This is
yeah.
Come on, man.
God, Jay, I can't believe you brought up something negative 5 minutes into the show. Shame on you, Jay. Shame on you.
It was like a new record, right?
It's his first day off for the week, and he's bringing up the negative stuff already.
Oh, you're good. Yesterday was my first day off. We're good.
Yeah.
So I did what is this your 5th novel?
Yes. I had to think about it, yes, because I wrote the Ravaged during the coronavirus. Yeah, that is. That's my 5th.
So between like your first novel coming out and this one coming out, do you still have like the nervous jitters or excitements when it's coming out, or is it just, it's just the book?
I don't have any jitters. It's just more. I know, like, here's what we need to do, and I'm getting hold of my publicist going. Here's some ideas, because the publicist always has the normal ideas of who they always send things to, and then maybe some newer things. I'm kind of like, hey, we need to try a bigger field here of the things that I know that would. Where I think things were influenced, would be influenced me, which are things that I listen to and read. So, and she listens to me. She's really awesome. And my film agent's been helping out with a lot of stuff too. So, and I've garnered some newer fans online too, which has been really nice. So, got a lot of newer fans from writing the Ravage with Norman, and
right.
And then there was some different knife makers and things that make these custom knives that become big fans. They're huge readers. And I'm like, this is pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would think that releasing the book today in 2023, and even in the last couple of years, would be totally different than releasing in 2010, because now you have like Twitter and Instagram and Tickety Talk and all these other places that you have to like hit, because you don't know if you're gonna have a fan.
Well, even with that, you've got to figure out a way to get it across that's kind of unique sometimes.
Right.
I'm not a whiz on any of that stuff. I try to throw some things together with music and things like that just to let people see, but I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. So, I think the most views I got on some of that stuff is going to be 600-700 views. I mean, it's not my forte, and I got off of social media for about 3 years. So,
Probably smart decision.
Yeah, really.
Well, when I first got on social media in 2008, it was a great place to connect with other like-minded people, and I connect with that's how I connect with a lot of different writers, different webzines and different things of that nature, until people realized or started to realize something of, hey, look at me all the time. And it's like that. That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We're trying to branch out. It's not everybody's not that important. I'm not even that important, They gave everybody a platform that necessarily doesn't need a platform, I mean, it's just, hey, I'm at Walmart. Great. I'm grocery shopping.
Here's a picture of the food I'm eating. I don't care. I'm having leftover.
Your shoes. I have slip-ons now too. I mean, come on. Who cares,
Right.
Before we go too much farther, I do want to shout out to your publicist, Rose, and thank her for getting this all set up and connecting everything. So shout out to Rose for hooking us up and get this all set up for us.
Definitely. Me too. She's awesome. She's done a really, really good job.
Laurel, we're here too. Goodness
Hi,
gracious.
Laurel.
I know, really. I mean, first of all, Laurel, it's Brad's show, and welcome.
Before we get into Back to the Dirt, what was it like writing with Norman Reedus? Did you all get to interact like in person, or was it just all over?
Back and forth on the phone. Emailing and texting constantly, because a big part of that book, the biker, of course, came for me picking his brain on him, because he's that's kind of his character, and then the other part of that character was me pulling from my cousin who served in the Iraq War.
Okay.
And then Jack was based on my uncle Jack, partially, and the things that he went through growing up. But then the other side of that was somebody that Norman met when he was flying back and forth. Guy who was part of a Fortune 500 company that put his life into this, and then when he made all this money, he realized everybody in his family was pretty much dead, and he had nobody to share it with anymore. And then the girl was loosely based on my niece, who's no longer with us, but she had some personal issues, but that wasn't her problem, or that wasn't her fault. But and the other part of that was Norman had he wanted this character who was a train hopper, and I'm like, yeah, we can do that completely. I said, I know somewhat about it, and I can do a little bit of research, and it was interesting doing a lot of the research. But then I also, because of where I worked at the time, I used to unload rail cars and stuff, and you would get trail hoppers and stuff sleeping inside of them and things. It was it's just interesting. So we just connected. I don't know how. My agent got a hold of me one night at work and was like, hey, would you like to write a book with Norman Reedus? I'm like, yeah.
Of course.
So we end up talking, you know, and I mean, about 10 minutes. We talked for about an hour or more. But I mean, when the first 10 minutes, he's like, I want you to write this book. And I'm like, well, there's more to it than that. You know, we need to keep talking and figure things out. And then the agents got to do their thing and talk. So, yeah, he's a super down to earth guy. Super down to earth.
Cool. That's cool. Was he a fan of your work already? Had he read your other stuff?
No,
or
I don't think so. I think his agent turned him on to me through DONNYBROOK, possibly.
Okay.
He told me, but it was like, so we didn't stick on that subject too long. It was, you know, he had mentioned DONNYBROOK and his agent, his book agent, and then we just kind of fell into talking about music and different TV shows and movies, and we were kind of like on the same page on things as far as our interest. So
that's cool.
So I want to get to the new book, but I question about that. When you're writing with somebody, like, would you go chapter for chapter, or you just did a part, he did a part? How
did Norman actually write anything, or did he just give you the ideas?
He had 3 character sketches, and I basically
yeah.
He would read I would send him like 25 rough pages every time I got like each of the 3 characters. I get a part done, I'd send to him to read, and he was like, read it. There was never any feedback that said you're totally fucking this up. He said, love it, keep going. So that's what we did.
Nice.
You know, and great guy. I mean, I can't say enough about the guy. It was there was no I don't know how it was like he was stuck on himself or anything like that. It was nothing like that. He was just very down to earth, you know. I know sometimes he's probably like, why do you want to know this? I'm like, where's, you know, the tattoos you've got? Where does that come from? What's the backstory of why you got that tattoo? Any stories you can relate to me about being out on bike rides you've had, wrecks, or places you've seen, places you've been, you know. I think some of his favorite parts of the book, especially when they travel through Kentucky, he loved that scene when I wrote it. But he's a good guy. That's all I can say, you know.
And Kentucky's a pretty good state, so, you know.
Yeah, I work there. I just don't live there, you know.
Well, I think that we should go back to the terrible review. No, I'm kidding. But you mentioned that this is the most personal book that you've written, and there's a pretty hefty afterword. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I actually read. Man, I had to do a thing at a university with Jared Kaufman, who had me out there. Super kind guy. He's a professor out there. He did a thesis on me and like some Midwestern writers when he was in college. Did a really good job. I think Donald Ray Pollock was part of that. I was one of them. I can't remember all of it, but it's basically Midwestern writers. But anyway, I read the opening of the book. I read like the first 7 pages. I really hadn't read it to anybody. And then I said, well, you know what? I'll read the afterward, because apparently college kids get kind of touchy if there's a lot of curse words. People get their feelings. I said, dude, don't worry. I'll cut out any type of cuss words that are in it or anything like that might offend somebody. And when I read the afterward, I didn't think much about it, how personal it was. So I read it and I got about halfway through it and read a part about my grandmother, and she's been dead probably 10 years. And I got kind of teared up. I had to take a breather there. And I'm like, you know, excuse me. I said, you know, I had to apologize, but I'm like, it's just personal, because it was all real stuff, you know. And then I finished. Yeah, we can talk about the afterward.
So
what tell me,
was this book more challenging to write since it is so personal compared to your other stuff?
No, not at all. That's the thing. You could pick apart any one of my books and I can tell you where something came from. That's because, you know, I don't make a whole lot of stuff up. The things that I'm interested in, I'll just research. Other things I just know from either, you know, my best friend's a cop, I do ride-alongs with him, and I've just always been right there in the shit when things happen and see how people, you know, just to see things. And then having friends that have been through drug abuse, alcoholism, whatever you want to talk about, you know, I just have always been around it. I didn't realize it until I started writing, because I didn't know you could really write about what you know,
So the way the afterword is set up, I mean, is this the way you set out for it to be, or did you start writing and just the gates open and were you ever afraid of like maybe revealing too much?
A lot of it had to do with, because whenever I first started writing the book, I wanted to write about my dad being in the war, but I wanted to be about a character who works in the factory, of course, which is me. I work in the factory, and I grew up around all these stories, and also had all these different things happened when I worked in the factory and still work in the factory.
Mm-hmm.
But it all circled around that opening picture of my dad standing with the grenade launcher and a pair of Chuck Taylors, which I always thought was the most badass photo. I'm like, you know, and the thing is growing up, I'd never seen that photo as a photo. It was in a little Kodak slide. And that box was in my parents' closet we lived out in a place called Gordon Ramsay Road, one of the old country back roads around here, when my dad worked at a tobacco plant. And then we moved to my grandparents' farm when he lost that job, and then go back to night school, become an insurance salesman. In that box, you know, I would get those pictures out sometimes, but I could never really see them unless you held them up to the light. You know, my dad never really talked much about them.
Mm-hmm.
He had some different medals and things he had kept from being in the war. And then we moved when he bought a place here in town, which is the house I live in now. It's my parents' home from when I was a kid. That box was with us, and my parents divorced, and that box went with my dad. And then years later, when I started writing, you know, I guess it was sometime after I published DONNYBROOK. It's probably before that, because we got to talk more about the war, and he went to the VA, and he got to where he was talking more about things, and he was more open about it. Because, you know, growing up, he never really talked about any people he served with. Yeah, I knew he was in Vietnam. He still had his old uniform and fatigues and stuff. A lot of stuff he wanted to throw away, and I think I still have some of his fatigues I still wear this day that are kind of wore out, and I just covered the holes up with patches and things like that. It's just one of those things. But he wanted to get those pictures blown up somehow, and ended up finding out Walmart, take them out there and get them scanned and blow them all up, and then we had pictures. And it was like, oh my God, you know, because there's still a lot of great photos from where he had swept the roads for mines every day, and one of them where he's just red clay from head to toe. The glasses covered everything.
Imagine, yeah.
Because he was on the back of the tank after he'd already swept everything. And he said, you ride in the back, it's like it's just debris sitting there blowing up on you. You know, it's like another day's work. And when I actually got to sit down and talk to him about boot camp and everything, because the actual second part of the book was I wanted to go back and talk to him about Operation Allenbrook, was an operation he served in where they were like under gunfire for like 8 hours and lost almost their entire platoon except for him and maybe 2 or 3 other guys. You know, he talked about a guy that basically was stuck out in the heat and you couldn't get to him because every time somebody tried to go get him, a sniper, somebody would shoot the other Marine, and they were under fire like that forever. And a couple of the guys that my dad served with, he didn't hook back up with till, gosh, maybe 10 years ago. And one of the guys was one of the guys he saved, who lives in Pennsylvania now. He calls it Pennsyltucky. He's a character. He's a hell of a character. But he didn't know that guy had been coming to Kentucky because he was in the horse racing. He'd been coming to Kentucky every year for the past 20, 30 years, you know. And him and my dad finally reconnected because my dad was trying to get his Purple Heart from where they'd lost paperwork from back overseas. And you had to retrace everything for everybody who was there during Operation Allenbrook. And he connected with him, and they got to talk, and he's like, well, yeah, I come to Kentucky sometimes for the Derby, and you know, I'm beginning to go into the horse race stuff. My dad's like, are you fucking kidding me? He's like, no. He's like, you know, that's only like 20, 30 minutes. And he ended up coming in one year, and I went over and met him and everything. He's a super cool guy. He's like, you know, he's talked about my dad. He's like, you know, your dad's a real hero. You know, he said, you know, the things that he done, he said he deserves, you know, his Purple Heart. And he finally got it last year, you know, so.
Oh, that's great.
53 years later, but he finally got it. Yeah.
I mean, you could probably have write a book just from those conversations. Then, you know,
I've thought of it's one of those things I would like to do. If it's a matter of fitting everything. It would be awesome to tell his story from being a kid,
right?
And what drove him to get into the Marines, which at his age was growing up. He wanted to be a tough guy. He wanted to go join the New York City Police Department because that was the thing back in the 60s, you know, and he was too short, you know, he was 5 foot, I think 5'8". He had to be 6 foot, that doesn't happen anymore. But so he said, I did the next best thing you could do. I joined the fucking Marines. All right.
I loved all the stuff from the after forward, you know, about you and your dad, and then how much of that you actually employed into the book. Like you were a factory worker and you're doing the bodybuilding, and he was in the Marines in Vietnam, and you know, all that kind of stuff. Does that make it easier to write the book itself, or does it make it harder to? I want to try to make it authentic to me and my dad as combined into this Miles character.
I don't know that it's easier. It's just a matter of getting it right, if you know what I mean. You know, I tend to like people who write from what they know. Like I always mention Larry Brown because that's a guy who really turned me on to writing. But I mean, even Charles Bukowski, which that's what was getting interviewed today. And the guy's like, I always thought Charles Bukowski's stuff was kind of like gritty and rough. He goes, but I don't think he holds a candle to what you write. Well, I mean, it's different times. It's different time period. But yeah, I mean, I like writers who pull from what they know. I mean, even Jack Kerouac, I mean, that's what made The Road or On the Road so good. His whole travels across the United States and meeting up with his friends and the different relationships they had and the characteristics of staying different places. But that book had this rhythm, it's like jazz or bebop, it's kind of like Elroy, that's kind of how Elroy writes. It's got there's a rhythm, that's kind of how I write. I like with a rhythm and a flow. I don't necessarily go for correct English, so to speak. But yeah, it's a lot easier for me to pull from my surroundings. And then if there's something that I'm interested in, I research it, which is like what I did with the Ravaged. I did a lot of research for South America and different places.
There are a couple of really dark moments though in the new one, dealing with PTSD and just trauma in general though. So when you're writing those parts, like, do you have to take breaks constantly? Do you have to go off for walks to get it out of your head? Like I don't know, would probably get to me after a while. You know what I mean?
I don't think it bothers me so much. I mean, I should say bothers me so much. It's because of the stories I grew up around. I grew up with my mother always talking about my real grandfather, which I never really knew until I was older, which the old mechanic, that's where that story comes from. That's like a 99% true story, except for the ending. But that was like conversations between my mom and my grandmother growing up about, do you remember that time, Daddy did this to you, or do you remember this time he did this to you and the kids, because of my aunt and my mom, were abused by him because he was just an abusive guy. He was a World War II vet. But it was just something. I had somebody pull me off when I was in San Diego years ago, and the lady had read Crimes of Southern Indiana. I was out there for Donnybrook, and super nice lady, big reader. And she's like, I just want to talk to you. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, why? What do you mean? She goes, well, I mean, were you abused as a child? I'm like, no, I said, my parents loved me. I said, I grew up in a home where everything was accepted, everybody was accepted. My parents were not, they had friends from every walk of life and then some. I said, why? And she's like, well, these stories are just so dark and so harsh. I'm like, well, you read them. I mean, I also liked them, but some, that you just don't keep reading a book. She said, well, they're just engrossing. She goes, I've never read anything like that. I said, well, I explained where some of the stories come from. It's like, oh, okay. She's like, oh, that really like opened her eyes more to, where it came from. I said, no, I'm fine. I'm the narrator from the things I've seen and done and heard. And the writer does.
Well, you didn't have that little disclaimer in the beginning. I'm fine, just so you guys know what you're about to read is not fine.
Well, the thing was, when I wrote this book, was I kept thinking, I think people need to know where these people come from, because it was just a deeply personal book to me. I talked to my editors about it, and my editor was like, yeah, I'm kind of like super excited to read what you're going to write. And I wrote it, and he actually didn't even edit it down or anything. I went back through
That's cool.
Towards the copy edit part of it, there was like hardly anything to change. So I kind of left it like it was, that was one of those things when I sat down to write it. I wrote it all out, and I did very little as far as editing. It kind of came out because it'd been on my mind for so long.
And in the after forward, you talk about, you started this book back in 2011.
Yeah.
Did you finish it back then and it's just kind of sat till now, or did you start it and come back to it more recently?
I have like ADD horribly. That's why I always have multiple characters. I actually wrote The Savage and Back to the Dirt at the same time. I took turns.
Okay.
I had 100 pages, then I went to 100 pages of this, came back and worked on that more and that, because we turned in 100 pages of both of those books to my publisher and sold them that way before I'd actually finished them. And I finished the rough draft of Back to the Dirt in 2013.
Okay.
And then a whole lot of crap happened. I wrote a comic book. I wrote a screenplay for Donnybrook that got bought but didn't get used. We were trying to sell Crime of Southern Indiana. Option was bought on it for, 6 or 7 years from CBS, and then, everything with the superheroes. So,
Right.
and then I ended up getting with a screenwriting partner that I'm with now, and he and I work really good together. And we adapted a pilot and then 3 episodes of Crimes, but everybody's like, it's too dark, man. I'm like, come on.
That's the good stuff. Put it on HBO.
I was going to say HBO, Netflix.
Yeah.
Somebody can do it now.
Everybody, it's just one of those things. It's either people were too busy or it's just too dark. But and we're looking at. We've talked about adapting The Old Mechanic, and we've talked about writing a story pulled from Crimes using the Moon Flisspart, the conservation officer. We were going to call it Full Moon Fever, is what we were looking at calling it, because we had enough material from the 3 scripts that we've written to actually blend something in and recreate off of what we'd already written. So we started making a movie script off of that, and we've talked about adapting Back to the Dirt. So we'll see what happens.
I'd like to see this get adapted. That'd be good.
Me too. As long as he and I are producers on it, yes.
I think it's interesting that you talk about like sort of a limited amount of editing, because you've picked a really fascinating structure. Like there's no chapters, right?
Yeah,
like that's cool.
I don't know. I think I don't know who I picked that up from. It doesn't. Trust me. I mean, I'm sure from writing. A lot of times when you start out writing a book a certain way, once you get 100 to 200 pages in, you're kind of like, that doesn't work anymore. Like with The Savage, we were trying to figure out how we were going to do the back and forth for flashbacks, because originally the way I wrote it, I didn't care for it anymore, and it didn't really pertain to it. And then even Back to the Dirt, every part had a heading, like maybe one section was called Cowboys to Hell, or section, just something that would symbolize what that scene or that entire piece was about. And then I'd asked my editor, I said, "Are you okay if I delete all these?" He's like, "No, it still works." I said, "All right." I said, "Because I'm not even caring about this anymore." Because heck, the book had, like I said, 2013, and now it's 2023. We were working on. We had went to work on edits on that thing probably twice. There was a time right before 2020, and then the next time was right at 2020, and then COVID hit, and then everything got totally screwed. And then we started on edits in 2021, late 2021, early 2022, and then my mom got really worse for wear. I mean, she's had not to get too deep in the weeds, but she's had cancer since 2006, and then she's been on kidney dialysis since 2009. She's been good, stayed in remission, but then she developed early stages dementia, Alzheimer's, when my wife and I got back, and I'd been working on edits, and I'm like, "Guys, I'm going to turn this into you." And I said, "But then I got to focus my mom for a little bit. Can you guys work with me?" Like, "Oh yeah, no problem. We're going to look at this, send it back to you, and you take your time." And in some ways it made it a better book because we weren't so rushed, but at the same time,
and that's good. They were flexible too with timing.
Oh yeah. Frost, Russ, and Giroux, FSG, whatever you want to call them. They're top notch. They're easy to work with. You got some of the best editors, copy editors, just quality. They've always been great to work with. They have no complaints. I know a lot of people have different publishers, and I've heard stories, and I've had people with other big publishing houses contact me on their first books, like, "Hey, I just want some advice. Is it always like this?" And I'm like, "I don't have those problems. I can't say." I said, "I'm sorry. You can try this, but I've not had those types of issues." So
yeah, the no chapter thing is interesting. I've read a few books like that before in the past, and really I kind of enjoy it like that. The only issue is there's no real stopping place, so you end up reading more and more.
There's some chapter. There's chapter breaks, like they're
little breaks, but then you're like, but you got to keep going until the next good break. It doesn't exist. So
until part 2, and you're 200 pages in.
Did you calling off work? You're like, I'm sick.
He's known for doing that too. He does a lot of things that are out of the ordinary. That kind of makes maybe that's where I picked it up from reading all of his books. That's just one of those things that I don't. If it's not important, it's not important. We don't, as long as the story flows and it makes sense, that's all that matters.
Well, and I think it kind of contributed to like a manic feel that sort of mirrored what was going on with Miles the whole time.
Yeah.
So I thought it was brilliant. Like, that's really, really interesting. Also, how you I don't want to give too much away, but how you also dealt with, you have a couple of characters who are talking to characters that maybe aren't real. And you manage that really well too. That's a lot of balls in the air, you know.
Yeah, the thing is that my dad had always talked about one of the guys that gotten killed and stepped on. I believe it was a box mine. I'm pretty sure this is the same guy. And from that guy stepping on a box mine and getting killed when they're sweeping a road, it saved my dad's life, but he still got impact from it. And that's where he got his hearing damage. And when he looked that guy up when he got home to figure out who his parents were, where they lived, the guy was actually from Louisville, Kentucky, and he had the parents' number. And he just never could bring himself to contact them. So I always felt like he was living with these demons or these ghosts.
Yeah.
Those incorporated to all these people that Miles has to deal with on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
So he drinks and he lifts weights, and that's kind of how he hopes to deal with those problems.
Yeah.
And they kind of egg him on sometimes too. Also, it's kind of like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where you have the devil on one side and the angel on the other,
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
should do as far as right and wrong. And that's kind of where Miles was at. Only his demons and angels were actually dead soldiers. So
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and I know today, as the three of us were finishing it, Megan and Brad were speaking about Shelby.
Don't
Not,
give anything away.
we're not giving anything away. We're just what was the thought process of that? The connection, the brother.
a lot of that came from. Gosh, there's a lot of things that came from that. A lot of it came from the stories of abuse my mother had talked about growing up. Me dated a stripper when I was in high school and lived with her for approximately 9 or 10 months. And then they always just the whole damage control of losing a loved one that you're, could be your, it's your maternal twin, that type of thing, and how you deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe when I was writing it, it's been so long ago that I believe I based it off an actual. There was an actual murder over a drug deal that had to do with oxycodone in around our area. If I remember correctly, but it was so long ago when I wrote it. I'd have to pull out. I got a box of notes from a long time ago that I read through, and it's like, holy crap!
Yeah.
Every time I write a book, it's like lots and lots of like notebooks, and I just fill them up and carry them around. I'll have like several different projects going at one time. So, but yeah, that was the whole. The other thing was, I don't know if y'all ever seen Blood Simple. Kind of with it was the Coen Brothers' very first movie, Blood Simple.
Okay.
And you watch it, and you as the viewer understand what's going on. What's unique about it is that when you get to the end of the movie, the characters have no freaking clue what just happened. You're like, that was really cool. It's kind of like, whoa. And it kind of inspired that whole, I don't want to call it trickery, because one of my buddies read the book, and when he finished it, he didn't catch anything until he got to the very end of it. He's like, I didn't catch what actually happened there till they meet Shelby at the end. I'm like, yeah, that's you got it. He was like, how did I miss that? I said, I don't know. I guess I did a good job.
Yeah.
But that was the thing, because I was about 100 pages ahead of them, and they kept on questioning. I was like, stop. It's going to clear up. Stop. And they didn't believe me till they got
We had to figure it out, Jay.
I know.
Hey, I will say all my predictions were right.
That's true.
So I had it nailed down. It was like 130 something pages in. I was like, I have a question for you guys. Where y'all at? I need to ask y'all.
I was actually
ask y'all if I think this is what's going on.
I was telling him stuff, trying to throw him off the trail. I was like, well, it could be
No,
this.
Jay, it just went over your head, Jay. Just admit it. You just didn't admit it.
I was ahead of you guys, though. So
Well, good. I did my job then.
you got the conversation started. That's what it was. We're talking
It
about
was
it
good.
still.
It was good.
Well, definitely check out Blood Simple. I think you guys would like it. It's a really good crime movie.
I'll check it out. Without giving anything away, I was not expecting that part to be in a story like this, but it was nice. It was a sort of refreshing to have something like that in a more sort of crime sort of centric novel, because usually you don't get that in these sort of grit lit kind of stuff like this.
Right. Yeah. There's so many themes for that book. I mean, you can go through post-traumatic stress disorder. You can go to mental health. You can go with drug abuse.
Right.
With oxycodone, you go into with steroids. You can even go with the horrors of war. It can go to a horror novel. It could go to there's racism. It's blue collar, working class. There's gun violence. I mean, it kind of hits on a lot of different subjects that I didn't realize until we got through the entire manuscript and all the copy edits. I'm like, damn, we hit a lot of nerves here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we read a lot of horror stuff, and there's a few times where it was teetering on that line where I was like, oh, "This could go
Especially with Miles and his
yeah
LSD
go
trip.
to that horror part, and then we kept
I'm
coming back to the
a,
gritty."
I'm a huge fan of like old horror movies. I love the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love, and it's one of my all-time favorites. But I like a lot of those old '70s movies too, like The Taxi Driver. That's just The Deer Hunter, things of that nature. So, yeah.
I also like you're listing all those things that it could be, but it's also like super political, which I really enjoyed. Like both Miles and Nathaniel, and even the guy at the end, what's his name, Yama. You know, they all sort of express this distrust of the government and criticism of the government, which I was not expecting in a military novel. You know, because I think that those of us who maybe aren't as involved in the military have a tendency to think of like military and patriotism and not questioning the government. And so I really thought it was really fascinating that all of these characters spent so much time thinking about the workings of society and were really very critical of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you work in a factory, you're going to hear everything. The big thing in the factory is usually you bitch about the government, you bitch about your taxes, and then you want to talk about basketball. Because you know, everybody, if you live in Louisville or work in Kentucky, you're either, you know, you're a UK fan or you're a Bell fan. You're not both.
You're not allowed to be both. No.
And if you live in Indiana, you can't really be an IU fan and work in Kentucky. So.
No. So you do wear your Hoosier shirt under everything else. So
no, you know, all my buddies I work with are UK fans, and I've just never.
Good.
I've always been
Good for
into
them.
boxing and MMA, so I've just never.
Okay.
I grew up on baseball and boxing. That's what always was my dad. So I don't really have a stake in that game. But yeah, I like UK. I would probably go with UK.
That's the correct answer. We didn't have to kick you off this show.
But yeah, and you know the thing is a lot of people, just because they've served in the military doesn't necessarily mean they're okay with what the government does. Because a lot of people, if you read a lot of like true military books, which I have, you've been around a lot of war vets, which I have, they don't really like that the government wants to make all the. They're not the ones who are out there fighting the war, but they want to tell you what to do, and what they want to do is not necessarily always the right thing to do. You know, one of the things I wished I would have put in the afterwards, you know, what my dad always talked about was for his generation being in the war was they were hoping to fight against communism, and that's what they were there for. And he always told me, he said, I understand if these villagers don't like me. He goes, because if the shoe were under the foot and I'm in the United States and they're coming into my backyard, I'm probably not going to like them either. And I'm probably not going to trust them. He goes, but I'm trying to walk that middle road to let them know that I'm actually here to help them, not hurt them. And I've got so many pictures of him with, you know, villagers and stuff when he was over there. He said, and there's the other side is some of those people don't necessarily have anything against you, but then if they don't do what the VC wants, they're going to threaten their lives because they're trying to make American GIs. And it's, you know, that's a really, it's like that with any war, you know, it's a tough trade. So there was a lot of little politics in there. But
I enjoyed that.
I've always been a middle of the road guy. You know, if I'm going to vote, my vote is always common sense. I wish there was a party that was called the Common Sense Party. It'd help out a lot, you know. But, hey.
I also think it kind of highlighted the working class, because it was so important for Miles to keep his factory job, that job he had, because he was afraid to lose. Not to give anything away again, but he's afraid he's going to lose it. He went from one job to another, and it was kind of like highlighted that was what the working class did at that time, because, you know, that's kind of what America's built on, these warehouses, these factories. Everywhere you look, there's several of those, and that's what, you know, like main job for a lot of people. So I really think it was like kind of highlighting, you know, the working class and how it's important to keep those positions too, and how, you know, one mess up, like beating somebody up, you could possibly lose it. So
whoops.
That really happened too. I mean, that came from a guy I used to work with. He was he was a rough dude. He was funnier than shit, but man, you know, he was one of those guys you didn't want to cross. I mean, he's one of those guys who would beat your ass, and that actually happened. It was somebody that he worked with on night shift when he worked down the street at one of the, because it's a big different department or different areas of the factory or whatever he'd worked at a long time ago, and somebody borrowed money from him on night shift for lunch or something a couple of times, and it's like, I got tired of that son of a bitch not paying me back. Saying, next week, he said, "You're getting it right now, motherfucker." He said, "I beat his ass and drove him to the ATM, and he paid me back." That's the kind of guy he was. I mean, I could see him doing it. It was one of the guys. There was another interview or whatever I gave, and I talked about that, and that's the first thing somebody said, "I know who that is." I said, "Yeah, you know."
You're right, though, Jay. I like that too. That, I mean, I have a tendency to write a lot of waitresses because I'm female and my characters are female, and I've worked waitressing jobs. But I love that, like, so many books are about sexy jobs, right? Like, I'm so tired of books about writers and editors and people on TV or people who like have family money and stuff like that. Like, when most of us,
right,
in factories or wait tables or work at a daycare or that kind of stuff, like that's a normal job. That's what most of us are like.
Yeah, I agree totally. I still work in the factory, so yeah, I definitely agree totally. But I come from a family of factory workers. My dad worked in a factory for 10 years and became an insurance salesman and bartended, and then went back into the military. And then my mom worked in a factory all of her life. My dad's dad, my grandfather, who I never knew, he worked in the steel mills in Pennsylvania at A.M. Byers. I mean, it's just what I've always known. And I started writing, just bored on night work, and read some books and said, I think I can do this. That was back in 2000. So, yeah.
You speak on a generation. That's not even a word. Is it different generations? Is that a word? No. Well, you thought about like Miles is how the new younger generations, they don't respect the job. They just kind of are lazy and try to get by doing not much or nothing. While Miles is, back then, someone would get a job and they'd stay at the same job for 40 years. They wouldn't hop around. And so I like those aspects you threw in there as well. The different generations and how they approach working and hard work and how they raise their families and stuff too. The sort of the values of the different generations.
Yeah. I mean, the values are different. I mean, we still deal with that where I'm at. We'll bring people in, and it's like they see somebody that's been there for 20 years, and if they see you sitting around at all, it's kind of like, well, I'm sitting here because I know what I've got to do in 20 minutes. Whereas they could sit there and not know what's going on in 20 minutes, and all their stuff's fucked up. And they're like, how did that happen? It's because you don't know what you're doing. That's not that there's a difference here. People just don't last. They want to pick and choose what they want to do. And it's like, that's not how you do this job. You've got to know the insides and the outs of it.
I feel like we have to like brainwash what's the new generation, Gen Z or whatever, and kind of retrain them how to have jobs and stuff and how to take responsibilities and everything. But
had to actually do some hard work instead of just.
I think, I don't know. I've just always been dedicated. I don't know I think the discipline came early because I started studying martial arts when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I studied martial arts from age 11 up till I was almost 40 years old. It just always that discipline and lifting weights and stuff. I've just always been dedicated to stuff. And that's the only way I would keep writing. I had a set time I would write, and I'd sit down. I knew to get some words down, and I just kept doing it and doing it. Until I figured out what I was doing wrong, which was not doing enough editing and rewriting. So I work with a guy who went to college for freaking 30 years or 13, whatever. I forget. He took every class he could take at IUS or whatever. And that's what he said. He'd taken writing classes because he read some earlier stuff. And he's like, I don't know what you're doing. He said, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. He goes, because I took writing classes and I quit doing it. I thought I wanted to be a writer. And I was like, this is too much damn work. He said, I see you're putting in the work. I just think it's a matter of finding the right person.
Yeah. And
it wasn't long after that I started publishing some stuff. But yeah, it's it's hard. It's not easy, But you also, it's almost, when you finish something good, it's good. It's almost like a good buzz, the endorphins going. You're like, man, we're hitting all cylinders, but it takes a while to get there. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what I teach, and that's what I tell my students. It's a tenacity game, right? It's butt glue. It's being willing to hear no every single day and keep doing it because you love it anyway. Because most of us quit, right? Like that's the thing. Right. I'm wondering about your martial arts training, if that's why you write fight scenes like better than anybody else.
And every other page.
And they're just they're brutal too.
They're brutal, but they're so specific, right?
You break down the mechanics of the body, which is when you break down a scene whenever you think about. Let me see. I'm trying to go too big on a rabbit hole here. Like when you write a scene, you're not going to write everything at once. You're going to have dialogue, and you go back through, then you have some descriptions, and you come back to you have some emotions and some feelings, and you start saying, okay, what works, what doesn't, what we do need, what we don't need. it's the same with the fight scene, because if you don't know how to fight, it's kind of hard to write a fight scene. But if you've actually sparred, you've been in fights, and you broke down fighting to understand fighting, because like when I studied traditional Chinese martial arts, I lived it and breathed it. It's something I did every day for, 10 or 15 years. And you were constantly breaking down scenarios, because we would have, after class, we'd always have like 45 minutes an hour. Okay, let's do what happens on the street. You're sitting here, you're sitting down. What are you gonna do when somebody comes up and they grab you, or they're gonna throw something in your face? You're sitting down. How are you gonna react? How's your body move? How are they set up? That's the same way I looked at when I would write something. You got to break each step down to think about that. That's I appreciate that, but I'm also a big Chinese martial arts movie. I love the old Shaw Brother movies I grew up on. I hate it now because all the people I used to watch, like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, even Donnie Yen, they come to America and it gets all flowery and watered down. It's not like the old, what we consider, like we have Clint Eastwood Westerns. The Chinese Westerns are awesome because they're back in the 1800s, and you've got all the traditional clothing, the traditional weapons. It's masterful the way they would shoot those things. But when they come to America, it just falls apart. America screws everything up.
But talking about your martial arts stuff, I mean, a lot of people think that's more like a physical thing, but you were just talking about, you think of all these different processes and situations and scenarios. It's a mental training.
Yeah, it is.
Concept also. So
it's
you got physical and mental. So
10% physical. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. Because you're constantly thinking, you're always aware of your surroundings. There's little things, when you go to sit down somewhere, you go to a restaurant,
scenarios constantly,
and back to the wall because you always want to see what's going on around you. It's almost like being a person of the law. If you're a strategic person, or you're in a war situation in combat, it's the same. You're looking at the same scenarios. Yeah. And you're constantly reflecting over and over again.
Yeah, because all your fights felt real, like opposed to like the Hollywood fight where they're punching each other 100 times and they're still running around and they don't act like they're hurt. Like one guy gets punched in the nose and he's pretty much done.
Yeah, and
you can tell the difference. That
they really
someone
screwed
who actually
in the Donniebrooke movie. I was really upset. They brought in a lot of guys who were trained. I think they were trained they did like Muay Thai and stuff, and then they also had some wrestling background, which is nothing that I've trained in Muay Thai. I love Muay Thai, but they should have used more of it. It was just too much of a free for all. It was almost like a big WWE wrestling there at the end,
just grab a chair and
right. It's choreographed just perfectly.
It was interesting watching all that to see how all that's set up. But yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes into whenever you break all those things down. Because when I write, I want it to be as realistic as possible. I want you to feel it and taste it and smell it. I want you to walk away. I want you to go take a bath when you get done reading one of my books. I want you to be broke and beat up.
Speaking on the authenticity, did you do a lot of research on the Vietnam stuff, or was that more through conversations you had with your dad about his experiences? Or
all the boot camp stuff was actually really what happened when my dad was in boot camp. He was on that bus. They had some different boot that he has just some funny ass stories. And then I'd read a book called Tiger Force, which is based upon, I believe that's what they pulled Apocalypse Now from, but it was an actual special forces division that decided that the war had become where we get into the government here, that it was no longer about winning the war. In order to win the war, they felt like they needed numbers, they needed a body count, so that the special forces guys just started killing innocent villagers. The book is awesome. It's like reading a detective novel, because it won the Pulitzer Prize the year it was written, and the two journalists go back and research all the way through the beginning, get to the beginning when this all started, and the divisions, because there was different divisions in that special forces that they had, groups that were going out and just slaughtering these villagers. And they trace them to present day. Some of them were still alive, and the ones that were still alive, their lives were shit. I mean, they were alcoholic, they were hooked on drugs, and they were having to live with the aftermath of what they had done. They basically committed war crimes. So my idea was that Miles was part of a recon unit, that my dad was offered a chance to become a recon Marine. And when he raised his hand, his buddy elbowed him. What the fuck are you doing? are you doing, Bill? They jump out of helicopters, and Dad's like, oh shit, I don't want to check on helicopters. But he's like, he's like the recon part of it. But my idea was that a recon unit is hunting U.S. GIs that are committing war crimes, and they don't want their government to know about it. They want the news to get a hold of that because it's going to make things look even worse. And now Miles kind of has to live with what he's seen and done to hunt these people down during the war. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I got the book. I had the book. Yeah, that's it. Tiger Force. It's a great book.
Cool.
Definitely worth reading. Definitely worth reading. And those guys on Tiger Force, that's where a lot they would actually. There was one guy who was he was an Indian, and he was part of that force. He was one of the guys that would actually cut ears off and put them around his neck or keep them in his pocket. He collected ears. It's a dark book, but man, it's so interesting. I mean, it really is. That's why I said there's a lot of truth to what I wrote in this book.
Mm-hmm. Are you interested in just kind of war in general, like World War II and everything, or more like Vietnam stuff? Or
yeah, I wish I'd never met my real grandfather till I was, like I said, I was about 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing all these horrible stories about him, but yeah, he actually stormed the beaches in Japan when they attacked Japan and had the wars over, the World War II over there. He was part of the Army Corps of Engineers. He kept a lot of I don't know if y'all remember the Time Life magazines, the big life. He had pictures he kept. There were certain issues he kept because there was pictures of him in there. Whenever the journalists came over to take pictures during the war, and he was actually
Cool.
Really?
But
that's pretty cool.
I didn't have any contact or learn about any of that stuff till long after he had passed away. And my mom never wanted me to have anything to do with him except for the time he took me to a gun and knife show of all things. Hearing all the horror stories about the guy, and he takes me to a gun and knife show. But
Brad, are you old enough to remember magazines? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Jay, I've got some in here somewhere.
Okay, I was just making sure. I mean, you being part of Gen Z, I was just trying to make sure.
Am I Gen Z? I don't even know.
I don't know.
I was born in '86. I don't know what Gen I'm supposed to be.
You're young and
Oh yeah, you're a Z.
wow,
Z.
you're young. You're way young. Man. Wow.
Here, I'll get my baby bottle and.
You're probably a millennial, right? That's probably a millennial time.
Am I a millennial? I have no idea. I don't pay
so.
attention to any of that stuff.
I'm 82, and I think at the end of.
Well, you're not that much older than me. 82.
Yeah, I think you're the final year of millennials.
Yeah,
my wife's 82 also.
Yeah.
Born in 82, not 82.
Right.
When are you born, Jay?
1942.
Well, black and white TV. No, 77. Yeah.
Am I millennial? I've honestly, I don't pay any attention to Gen Z. Millennial is Gen X a thing. That's a thing, right? Gen X.
I'm Gen X. That's what. Yeah.
Are you? Okay.
So my 13-year-old has to teach me how to do TikTok stuff. So
because the late 1900s.
My 13-year-old refers to the 80s and 90s as the late 1900s. Like it just goes through me. Like, what'd you learn today in school? Well, about the late 1900s. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, the 80s and 90s of the 1900s. Like, okay.
It led up to this thing called Y2K. It was horrible.
Yeah. Just,
oh yeah. Yeah, the world was going to end, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
That was such a letdown, wasn't it? The clock just ticked on over. Just kept on going.
It kind of really was a letdown. I mean, yeah.
It made you realize what you can no longer believe anymore.
That's right.
When people tell you something, it's like, go on, I got shit to do, man.
So I appreciate in the book that when you did the flashbacks, you didn't get too technical, and I've read some military books before where it's just over the top technical. This was the kind of gun they were using, down to the serial number, and this was kind of the tank they were using. Like you went far enough to kind of paint the picture. So I can appreciate the fact that you didn't go too technical, because then it becomes like a manual or something, So
Right.
Were you ever afraid that, okay, writing anything, thinking, okay, maybe this is too deep for someone who's not got a background in military, and pull back a little bit?
No, I've just always been a sparse writer. I like Raymond Carver. I love Raymond Carver's work. It's Amy Hempel. A.M. Holmes. They always give just enough sparse detail that towards the end of the story. And the thing is when you start to read your own work, when you start to get lost in your own work, you know you're doing something. You're like, I didn't leave nothing out because I just totally got immersed in it, so we can keep going. But you know, other times you'll read something like, it just needs a little bit more. And I didn't necessarily set out to write so much as a military book as I wrote just a human condition story, because I like the human condition, you know, and this is what he was going through. So what type of tank he was doing minesweeping for really didn't matter. It was more about the mines and the things he was trying to get away from and dealing with the horrors of war, you know, in his brain. And his kind of like Dexter's co-pilot that he was having to deal with on the sides, you know.
Yeah, and with all the flashback stuff, I liked how Miles would just sort of fade into it and fade back out. It wasn't like the next chapter is a flashback and then now we're in the present, and it just sort of blended together really smooth. I really like that as well.
Well, I never really thought I like action adventure. So regardless how dark it is, that's what you're kind of going on a journey. I mean, that's what writing's all about. You know, you go on a journey and you have conflicts that get in the way because you've got a goal, you know, and you can't get the goal right away. And then there has to be some type of change there, evolution towards the center that builds a new arc out, you know. And I tend not to write books with the middle. I don't care for middles of books because it gets boring. You know, I kind of like to really hit you in the face at the beginning and really plow through and then really bring it home towards the end. At least that's what I try to do. Yeah.
It's not really a spoiler because it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot per se, but when Miles is on the LSD, and that just sort of enhances all the PTSD and all the stuff he's seeing and everything. Was that something you specifically set out to do? I'm going to have him do this drug so I can, you know, really enhance the PTSD aspect, or was that just a happy kind of accident?
Well, it was one of those things that, you know, because I'd done LSD when I was younger, I was like, how do I tie this into a story? And originally, hey babe, my dog's in here. I don't think she's gonna bark. Originally, I was like, how do I tie this into a story? And the second part of the book originally was a lot different. And one of the other characters they were hunting down that was I can't remember his name now. That was Nathaniel's brother that got murdered. It was
Bedford, is that right?
Bedford's best friend that they ended up buying his place. He originally ends up hooking up with Nathaniel, and they actually end up taking Miles hostage and feed him LSD and do like a CIA type thing because they're trying to figure out why his brother got murdered. And we end up changing that the entire second half of the book got rewritten, and they were kind of like, they didn't want this character or that character, and it had set so on. I'm like, look, I wrote this as a rough draft when I wrote it. You know, the first part of the book was the strongest because usually the first 30,000 words is what I scour over the most to build into the next 30,000 words. I'm like, we don't have to cut any of these characters. I said, I can redo these characters. And that's what I did. You know, Nathaniel became one of the main co-stars of the book, become more of a father figure towards his nephew. And they're kind of like, wow, okay, well, forget what I said. We'll just go. This works, you know. I'm like, yeah, this isn't a problem. You know, as long as you didn't try to turn into a spy novel, I don't have a problem with it because I rely on my editors. You know, when I've written something and I'm having a problem with the last 3 quarters, I'm kind of like, because I don't really think when I write, I don't think about a message or what I'm trying to get over. I'm just trying to think of what is realistically ingrained within these characters. You know, it's a real situation. This is a real story. Where do we go from here? I'm trying to, you know, because you do get, that's one of those things like you were saying, Jay, you know, do you ever want to walk away? That's when I want to walk away and rethink, because you can't just spit a book out in 4 weeks. You know, there's a lot of time. I found the longer that a book sits and the more notes you take on it and write it and rewrite it and step away from it and come back to it, the better it gets. You know? So,
yeah, the whole LSD stuff that in the PTSD together. I mean, it got trippy. It really got trippy.
I'm glad it did. I hope I didn't.
And I was like, man, if I was into drugs, I would take some shrooms right now and probably enjoy this even more. I'm not saying to do that, people. Okay, Brad put the disclaimer up. Don't listen to Jay.
Type it on there.
I'm just saying it would just be somebody's paradise. You know, if they were tripping on something and started reading this, they'd be like, I totally understand, man.
I don't know if y'all seen
too, you know, LSD, people use LSD and mushrooms now to help with post-traumatic stress, you know, in small amounts. Yeah.
I don't know if y'all seen True Detective season 3, but the main character was a Vietnam vet, and so some of the scenes from this book reminded me of that, where he's seeing the people he's killed and stuff.
Oh yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah. Like the ghosts from the past kind of ordeal. Yeah.
If you haven't seen True Detective season 3 or 1, definitely check it out. They're great.
I've seen one. That's all I've seen so far.
1 and 2. I watched bits and pieces of 3. I don't know why I didn't finish it. I watched bits and pieces of it. The first 2 seasons I liked the best. They're never going to go wrong with the first season just because of the acting.
First season's so good.
The writing was so spot on, and the
That's
second.
probably why I didn't watch the other ones yet, because I'm afraid it's gonna be a letdown, because the first season was, I got really into that one.
2 is actually really good. I think it was a lot better. Some people
A lot of people talk trash about season 2, and so I never watched it, but I've heard it.
There's some pretty good stuff in there. I liked it a lot, but that's just me.
Give us some of these smart questions you have, Megan, that you wouldn't share with us earlier today.
Real quick, I do want to mention
asked
something real
a
quick
bunch
before I
of them
forget.
already.
You said that you don't go into a story sort of wanting to like say something or have it be a message, but I felt like you did anyway with like the political stuff and everything. So there's not a question, it's just a statement.
More of a comment.
More of a comment, yeah.
A lot of that it comes from being a blue collar person, and that's the conversations you're around. Like I said, at work, and that's what, one of the questions I got early on during edits was like, is this what really people talk about? I'm like, yeah, dude, these people don't work in cubicles. I said, you are out working with your hands all day and lifting heavy shit and smelling fumes. You're kind of pissed off that you're carrying the weight of the world on your back, in a sense. I said, because you're paying taxes and you see what goes on in the work, sometimes you get a little pissed off. Nothing with you're maybe you're helping other countries, but you start to think, what about the people in my country that need help? There's plenty of people here that could use help getting grants to go to school, bringing jobs back. There's all kind of things, and soldiers, that have post-traumatic stress that need help with the VAs. There's all kinds of things that get overlooked. People get a little pissed off, because you're actually paying your taxes for somebody to do a job that they're not fucking doing. That's the only job that you can go to. You can become a politician and make $100,000 a year, and when you get out of office, you're a freaking millionaire. How does that fucking happen? Not to get political, but I'm just
no. I totally agree with that, because and the fact that you look at this book and you see it. Well, it involves, like Megan was talking about earlier, it involves the military. So that actually would scare some people off that are going to think that it was going to be leaning towards a certain side because it involves military. But I think
pro-military.
Yeah, but I think it's important. Like Miles has a moment, and again, not a spoiler, minor, where he's having a conversation and he mentions he's accepting of all people, and how his family was always accepting of all people, and it comes across in a way that was like letting everyone know. So
I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Doggy.
Hey,
calm down.
Oh.
She's wanting to play. I'm listening.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
That's okay, Brad.
You're good.
I think it's really interesting that you didn't go into it sort of with a theme, I suppose. Because there's this quote on page 159 where you say, to become a soldier, you got to become something that's not much different from the enemies you're fighting. In reality, you have to become something much worse, or you won't survive. And I think that fits for Miles, but it also fits for Shelby.
Yes, yes, it does.
And just the idea that to go through something terrible affects you so deeply and changes you so much. And I think you'll have another one, or there's another quote that's like, we're still, we never really come back. We're still living in our heads. And that sort of fits there too, that there's all of these various traumas that your characters live through, and it changes all of them. And it becomes this madness, but it all has sort of the same origin, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and I never thought, when I was writing it, I never thought about the two characters and what they're both dealing with, but I think that was the attraction to them, not realizing they both had these issues. But sure, Shelby realizes that Miles has issues, but he doesn't know what her issues are. Right. That's kind of what made them stick together. That's what kind of attracted them to one another without really knowing it. And that's the other thing that kind of goes into the afterward, is probably that was the biggest reason that my dad probably never wanted to join the military, because war changes people. It does, regardless, good or bad. You're there to do a job, but at the same time, when you come home, you're not the same person you were when you left. And that's why some people, I've said this before, that's why some people they re-enlist and they want to go back, because I think, one of the things I've always heard is, because of all you never get, you're hearing gunfire every day and you're hearing explosions every day, and you live with that for whatever your tour of duty is overseas. And when you come home and that noise is gone, it's kind of like you start missing that noise for whatever reason. Right. That's why you go back.
They can't reacclimate to normal society.
Exactly. And there's a lot of guys in the special forces that when they come home, they've got they're so far advanced as far as war and what they can do inside the military. Then how do you put that into everyday life to create a job for yourself? Maybe you don't want to be a police officer, because that just doesn't interest you. A lot of guys get into training for tactical now, or survival type things, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's what they know, especially, in the different levels of the special forces, not just the special forces in the armies, but Navy SEALs, they all have their own specialty. Actually, even the Marines have the recon, which has become MARSOC now, which is kind of like a combination of special forces and the Navy SEALs. They've completely redone that. And then, every branch has their own little special entity. So, and that's really something hard to walk away from, because you were a warrior, basically,
Yeah.
That's what you were, so it's I can't even imagine, my dad, I'm trying to think, I think he enlisted for 3 or 4 years, and I think he got out early, because when you put in a year for war, it'll knock like a year off of your service or whatever it was, and that's what he ended up getting out early. But he was disgusted when he came home because of everything he lived through, because he basically had survivor skill, because he's seen some die. I never understood. That's what he told me, is I just kept thinking, why them and not me? That's really hard to live with.
Yeah, there's a guilt that really shouldn't be there, but yeah, I mean, I've read stories about that, seen documentaries about it, and and unfortunately, that's doesn't always end very good, I guess, very well here when they do come home, because then you have some turn in life of drugs, crime, or even suicide afterwards, because they can't get back to the way things used to be, and they do have this guilt inside them. So, yeah.
It's not like they can come home and just flip a light switch and turn all those experiences off. It's ingrained in them forever now.
And I think the best thing you can do is talk about it. I think that was one of the things that he understood when he started going to the VA, was he got to talk to people and help other people that have been through similar things, which all of your service members do that. They always rely upon the older generation that's actually been in a war. It helps them understand war, when they come home. So, yeah.
Right.
Did you do any interviews with any other vets or anything?
No, I just have my, I grew up around veterans. That was the thing. I never really thought much about it. My uncle was out in the Korean War and Vietnam, both. It's just, they're all like my dad. I grew up around these family members and friends, like at the VFW. They always told stories, and I never thought much about it. I wish I had a notebook then and paid more attention.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an older gentleman that was in the Air Force that, gosh, I can't think of what his name is, that goes to the local VFW, and he was a bomber pilot, and he could tell you like that where he was at, what he did. It seems like his name was Artie, I think. I can't remember if that was his name or not, but my dad's cousin, his name's Pete. And Pete's a jokester. And we went to a birthday for my dad at the VFW one time, and Pete showed up, and he sits down. Artie was across from us. They were talking about Artie being in the military and flying in the Air Force. And Pete walks in. He's like, "God damn, Artie, I didn't know you were still alive. I was afraid I missed your funeral." He goes, "I'm glad to see you're still alive." He's just a jokester like that. And I'm like, "Holy shit, I can't believe you just said that." And I'm like, you just have to know Pete. He's a funny guy.
I mean, I would say for them to joke about mortality probably isn't as like off-putting as it would be for like us, because they lived and died next to people. So
no, I mean, even the bartending scene where Miles is there drinking at the bar and kind of dealing with some things, and the two guys behind him are having these conversations. That's a real conversation. My dad was in her bartending. He had kicked the guy out. This guy wanted to, he ended up pulling his pants down, trying to piss all over the floor, piss my dad off. Yeah, my dad ended up kicking the guy out. It's just one of those things that I grew up around. It's those little things we pick up.
What did your dad think of this novel? Like when did he know you're?
I've got his copy here. I've been out of town. I've been able to get it. I've been able to take it over to him. Yeah. I've got.
Was he excited about the idea of Miles sort of being partially based on him?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know if he realizes that. I don't even know that he knows I dedicated it to him yet. So I kind of kept it as a secret for him till I give it to him and let him read it, because that was the other thing, is I wanted something for him to be remembered by, because he served his country and he's just a hell of a guy. It took him 53 years to get his Purple Heart. He deserved it a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, and a lot of those guys that are in the pictures at the end are probably not alive anymore, but he's got a story about every one of them.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
That's cool.
You think you ever write another military based kind of story like this in the future? Or?
It's a possibility, because I'd really like to write nonfiction. I'm working on a nonfiction book now. I turned the first 122 pages into my agent. And
what's it about?
It's two different things, which is probably what would make it unique as a nonfiction book. It's part memoir of me telling about some of the really bad criminal things I did growing up that ties me into this criminal family that I'm writing about from the area that I've been doing research as a detective on these crimes that committed back in 1999 to 2000, 2001. And they were like the very first RICO case in the area. Two detectives that pursued them. And there was also a dirty detective involved that kept screwing the case up for them, and they didn't realize that they were giving them information when they were trying to bust them the entire time. It's a lot of horrific stuff they did, but it's right at the cusp of technology, when it's car stereos, speakers, amps, oxycodone because they were doctor shopping, theft from construction sites, because back in the 2000s you would go out to build a $150,000, $200,000 home. You leave all your stuff on the work site. You have to worry about nobody stealing it. You can't do that now. I mean, nothing was digital. They would buy receipts from people and hire somebody to go in and steal what's on those receipts and then take it back and get the money for it. I mean, it was like they had a hell of a ring going. It's just an interesting story. It's like the Wild and Wonderful Whites, West Virginia, in a sense.
Those people are wild.
Wow. Yeah.
And ATMs, they used to steal ATMs. That was another big thing from the area, because at the time in 2000, the cops didn't have a database where they shared everything. Crimes would go on. They didn't make any connections to what they were doing. So it's a pretty interesting story.
Cool. Sounds great.
So everything's past the statute of limitations where you can't get in trouble, right?
Are you
a lot of stuff that I did, I was underage anyway. So
a lot of that stuff's happening still today. I mean, I think today's drug is what, fentanyl? Is that the big thing that's floating around now? But a lot of that
one
stuff.
of the stories here, this has nothing to do with this book, but yeah, the new book was I was about 16 or 17, and we used to go mailboxing a long time ago. And me and my cousin, and my cousin ended up working one night, and he's like, we were going to hook up with him afterwards, me and another guy. And the other guy drives this old beat up Pinto. While we were out driving a Pinto, don't ask me to go mailboxing, because you're not going to get away.
It's going to die on you before you try to get away. But
well, we ended up cruising through a neighborhood right before we get on the country back roads, because if you go to country back roads, you have to worry. Our rule was always, you need to get these old farmhouses where you got a road that's a mile long, and you ain't got to worry about it. And for whatever reason, here's these houses that are right next to each other, and we hit one of them and we took off, and we go out to a farm road, and next thing we know, somebody's bright line is behind us, and we're thinking, oh, hey, it's my cousin. He must have got off work early. Yeah, we're real fucking smart. So this guy pulls up beside us. He's driving a SS El Camino, and my buddy's got the window rolled down. He's like looking at me and looking to the guy who's driving. He's going, "You little son of a bitch! You think that shit's fucking funny, huh?" And he's like, "You think that shit's real funny, motherfucker, huh?" I'm like, "Oh shit! I'm over here holding a ball bat. I'm not too worried." The guy gets out and walks over to my buddy's side of the window. My buddy's looking at me, and he's got tears in his eye. And this guy's sitting there calling us, "Son of a bitch! You want to go downtown? We're gonna go down to the fucking police station. You hit my fucking mailbox." And I look over, and my buddy's like, "He doesn't have any clothes on." And I look over, and this guy's like standing in a pair of hush puppy shoes, and there's his balls like right at our window. So he ends up reaching the car, takes my buddy's keys, gets his name and number. He doesn't say nothing to me. He goes and gets in his car and leaves us out there and drives away and tells us when he come back. He's like, "Call my buddy's parents." My buddy's like, "Dude, that guy's fucking naked." He's like, "What the hell?" He's like, "Yeah, let's go downtown with you, buddy. You got no clothes on." So then the guy comes back. He's dressed. He's got his wife with him, and she's like looking at us like we just, like screwed her cat or something. I mean, she's like really and he's like, we called your parents, talked to them. They said you're an honor roll student and good kid. And he goes, why would you hit my mailbox? And he's like, well, we weren't really thinking. He looks over at me and goes, I never did get your name. He says, what's your name? I said, Frank. Frank what? I said, Bill. He goes, are you Frank Bill's boy? He goes, man, me and your dad used to drink and party all the time. He goes, I'll tell you what, if you just replace my mailbox after you done called my buddy and got him in trouble, you just replace my mailbox, we'll just call it even. He said, and if you're going to go out mailbox and get a better car, he said, you can't get mailbox in a Pinto. So my buddy got in all his trouble with his folks, and I didn't get in any trouble at all. But
yeah. So the naked cop needs to be in the next book.
Yeah, that guy was nuts. I couldn't believe it because I could have known my buddy because I couldn't see. My buddy's face was in front of mine, and he just had these tears coming. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you, dude? He moved back, and I was like, holy shit.
And then people started getting like better mailboxes, like designer mailboxes with bricks and stuff around it. It just screwed up the whole game.
Yeah.
Not that I know from experience or anything, but
Yeah, those will jar you. Yeah.
Yeah, you hit one of those that you're feeling. Not that I know or anything, just
We had a brick mailbox like that when I was growing up in my first house. It was like 3 or 4. It was my birthday, and I remember the front door was open so you could see outside, and there's just all of a sudden this crash and this loud cloud of dust, and like the neighbor's kid stole their mom's car and destroyed the mailbox, ran through the brick mailbox, totally totaled their car and everything. I just remember that because it was my birthday. I was like opening Legos or something. He was like crying and came in. Oh, I need to use the phone, and yeah, you messed up, buddy.
Yeah,
Moral of the story is
a lot of crazy stuff. So I'm that into the crime story I'm writing basically. So
Megan, it's time for your crime stuff.
Pardon me?
It's time to tell us what you did when you.
Megan's got some crime stuff.
No.
No, I
Her
did not
autobiography stuff. Her
get in trouble
nonfiction.
at all. No,
Jay, remember she's Canadian, so they're nice and they don't get in trouble.
that's true.
she wrote this, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Oh,
That book.
y'all.
Mine's back there in a spotlight on the shelf.
Mhm.
Just so you know.
I mean, you're already kissing ass wearing the shirt, Jay. You know.
I did not dawn on me. It's just.
Yeah, no, I didn't get in any trouble at all. As I had
Right.
like
Wink,
very no, I had like super fundy Christian parents. So
That's right, because you don't know
That's right,
anything
she did tell
about
us this
Christmas.
before.
That's right. Yeah, I grew up under a rock.
My
so.
God, that was cringy. Don't bring that up again.
I was raised as a Methodist, but I still did a lot of stupid shit. So
Do you feel like being raised religious like that caused you to act out more? Because I know with a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some people do that. Like you always hear the preacher's kids are the worst ones because they're so strict at home. They go out and sort of act out. Do you feel like that was you at all, or not really?
no, I don't know. Being raised on a farm and you're out in a rural area, we weren't. You didn't have video games and things. I was always. I learned how to hunt. Because a gun wasn't meant for what some people use it for. It put food on the table. You had hunting seasons, and we learned gun safety from my grandfather and my dad, or I did, and my cousins did also. But and we understood that you didn't point that gun at somebody. It was the safety was on, and you went out to hunt an animal. You did target practicing and stuff like that, but that was meant to provide for you. Different times.
You didn't need an AK-47 to kill a deer.
Well, even with that, those guns are just doctored up. That's just a high-powered rifle they made to look a certain way. I don't really understand any of it, but yeah, that's what growing up, that's what the guns were for. And you had bow season, grew up around knives, all that kind of stuff. Cutting wood, fishing, that's just what I was around. Yeah, we would get out of the house and run up in the woods and build fires and things like that. That was always our thing, was stealing blue tip matches and Sears catalog pages to go build fires out in the woods. That was always something we always thought we were doing, getting away with stuff, and have all our knives and throwing stars and stuff like that. But we didn't have all the luxuries that people have now. It wasn't about technology. It's a lot like what Harry Crews talks about. You looked at the Sears catalog and these were people you made up lives for, very similar. Would you?
So you played in the great outdoors, which kids today don't really know about the great outdoors.
Right. I mean, we went to a swimming hole out in the river, I mean, they put a pool in it, one of the local forestries we used to go to, but yeah, we had a swimming hole out down on Blue River we used to go to. when I was a kid. You didn't, when you went swimming, you wore a pair of tennis shoes because you want to get your feet cut up on rocks,
Mhm.
and then wade fishing, just a different time period,
Yeah.
Yeah, my kids won't swim anywhere that they can't see the bottom.
Yeah, my grandfather was an avid
Don't
coon
trust
hunter.
it.
He was always around hunting dogs. He raised, bred, and trained coon hounds. And that's another story part was either going hunting with him or the men he hunted with would bring their wives in and they would sit with my grandmother and tell how bad their marriage was. And my grandmother was like a counselor to these women that, every weekend whenever they were out coon hunting and stuff. So it was always, I just kind of grew up around storytelling, in a sense, these rough lives.
But it's
So
too hot to go outside.
No, we didn't even have air.
I don't know.
Go jump on the trampoline. I paid a few $1,000s for it. 5 minutes later, did you go? No.
If you've seen the TikTok where the kid, he's like teenagers, like, oh, did people really used to drink out of the water hose? And catch another guy talking about back in my day. It's really funny.
My grandparents had a cistern, so they bought their water to come in and fill the water, every so often you get enough rainwater. So, and they didn't have indoor plumbing. They had an outhouse, that was, it was a farmhouse. It was built in the 1900s. So, just kind of grew up on all that. My aunt always said, we were so poor we couldn't have pets. We couldn't buy a pet because my grandfather would go out and catch a pet squirrel or a baby rabbit for him. That was one of the things they did. And to break his dogs from coon hunting, so because your dog could get stuck on the wrong type of trail, he would actually catch possums and keep those so that he would break them from getting that possum scent. A lot of times he would do things of that nature also. Grew up around a lot of different things of that nature.
You're talking about you grew up around storytellers. Do you think that's sort of naturally how you progress into becoming an author? Sort of the environment you grew up
I
in
just
like
never
that?
realized it. Yeah, I never. That was my whole turn on to Southern literature and Larry Brown, because when I started reading all those guys, I was like, I'm not from the South. I'm from Southern Indiana.
Yeah,
but it's very fucking similar. Well, that's why I always say, regardless of where you live, everybody has a South. Everybody has their own South. And that's usually where the poor people live. It could be Massachusetts, of course, the Carolinas, which is the South, but up north.
Well, and I get that question a lot, how I write the South when I grew up in Canada, but I grew up in rural Northern Ontario. So it's, it's the same as here.
I don't know.
Jay, was that French, Jay?
I don't know. I see a lot of that in here. Dorothy Allison, probably one of my favorite writers. She doesn't write anything anymore, but I've read all of her books. Her book of short stories or essays, Trash. I think it was called Trash. Cave Dweller.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she's.
Bastard Out of Carolina is great, but all of her work is great.
But even I love Bonnie Jo Campbell. And it's the same, right? We're all from different places, but it's the same people.
Yeah, she has a farm, I believe. Her mom read Donnybrook and loved Donnybrook. Yeah, she's something else. I like Bonnie a lot.
Her mom read it.
Yeah, I never really thought about it because I grew up on the movie. I never read the books. There was gosh, what is the name of that movie? Drawing a blank here. It's an old movie. It's based on a series of books about the Asian master that teaches, Remo Williams. Those are based on a series of books, and it's not actually called Remo Williams. It's called something else, but it's about an Asian master who trains this other guy gets basically blown up, and you have to change his identity and everything. He ends up training. I don't know if y'all are probably a little bit older, since y'all are older than me. I don't know if do y'all remember Remo Williams' Adventure Begins?
I remember the name. I don't think I've seen.
Well, it's based on a series of books, and her mom knew those books, and I hadn't thought about those books in years because I collected comic books as a kid, and I always remember those at the comic book store. And I was like, I kind of wondered if maybe that's what triggered me to write the Donnybrook the way that I did. Other than it was about my Chinese martial arts teacher. If I had a picture, I'd show you. He looks identical to Fu. Yeah, he came from China, came fresh over here in the 70s and had opened a school, and then he started teaching kind of privately after some things happened. But he was an acupuncturist and internalist, and went to everything he knew from learning over in the temples, from acupuncture and different types of internal medicine and healing. He had to go to school for over here to get degrees, and he did acupuncture for my wife when she had some medical issues. He's a super, super good guy. But I don't know if that in the back of my mind, not realizing that I was thinking about Remo Williams, I turned that into my own type of story, you know.
Yeah.
It's an old movie. It's really good though.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like that you said that there's kind of a South everywhere because, you know, your stuff and like Donald Ray Pollock and Tiffany
Yeah.
McDaniel, you're all in Indiana, Ohio area, but it feels like it's, I don't know, there's like this grit to it that feels like it's from the South.
Yeah, because that's one of the things when Donald Ray and I were talking long ago. That's what he was talking about hunting and stuff. He's done all the same stuff I've done and worked in factory, you know, worked in a paper mill and retired from a paper mill and then got his MFA. I tried, but they wouldn't have me, so I just said fuck it. And yeah, you know, I didn't really understand the whole thing with the schooling, but yeah, I was turned away a couple of times, so I just kept doing what I was doing. So yeah,
I can tell you, it's a culture shock because I mean I was born and raised here in Columbus, so Columbus is the capital of Ohio. My wife though is from Southern Ohio, so when I lived down there for a little while working in radio, and when I met her, like I was already down there maybe 3 or 4 years. I couldn't handle it anymore down there because it was just it was a whole different. And so she's used to it. And so when we moved back to Columbus, it was a culture shock for her because that's all she knew was Southern Ohio, which is farmland and warehouses, factories and stuff, you know, and here totally different. So yeah, every place has a South, you know, it's a little different. So.
They do. I always say that because they do. I know a lot of people always, they read something. It's like, it'll be like, well, you're copying Southern literature. It's like, no, everybody has a South. It's just a matter of you understanding where you come from. That's what that's what the South is to me. You know, you understand where you come from. You write about it. You're teaching others through your own literature. You know, because there's. Trust me, when I went through the first 2 books, I mean, my editors had so many questions about slang and dialogue, like what does this mean and what is that? And, you know, what was one of the things about a pocket knife being in a case? Well, if it's called a pocket knife, why does it have a leather case? I'm like, yeah, it's a leather case. You put it in there and you snap it. I said, I wore one as a kid. But do fatigues really have button flies? I'm like, yes, they really have button flies. That's how you if you don't, something's going to be hanging out, you know, that's how it works.
It's now a lesson for them. So
right, yeah, that's the whole cool thing about editing. You know, that the editor learns from the writer while the writer learns from the editor. So it's a 2-way street. It's interesting. You know, that's why I love my editors always.
When you're working on something new, like you have a new idea or you start writing something, who do you usually run it by just to get an honest opinion?
Nobody.
Keep it to yourself.
Once I get 100 pages or more, I usually just pass it on to my agent and see what she has to say. Yeah, because she's got a book of stories right now, and she's got the nonfiction stuff, and then I've got another fiction novel that's just kind of it's a combination of 2 novels that I had pieces I like. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's just going to sit for a while, because I really want to write some nonfiction stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you, since you have a short story collection, you said you've got another one, do you approach those differently than a traditional novel or kind of going with the same mindset?
No, I like it's the same thing, you know. The short stories, some of them have been published in other places. They were paying venues that I got asked to write for, but one of them, there's a huge novella that's in it it's called I've changed the name several times. It's trying to think. I think it's called Lives of Salvage.
Okay,
and
I like that.
It's about 22,000 words. You know, really, you know, if an editor pulled it out, they could probably say you could expand on this and turn it into a novel because the way that I write is just so sparse. But it's a really good story. But it's just been sitting since 2016 probably. You know, that's the smallest things that happens. You know? You write stuff and I don't know how many things I've started and I just set it off to the side and started something else. That's kind of what happened.
I started 2011, so.
Right, but I actually finished it. It was just a matter of getting
you got it done.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Savage, you know, there's things I don't like about the Savage, but the Savage is basically the main characters. Van Dorn is just basically me and my cousins. That's my childhood of being in the woods and the things we learned growing up from canning and taking care of ourselves, using the land to take care of ourselves and knowing where we come from. It's just basically my childhood in a sense, and then my infatuation with the cartels and the border wars. I've always been infatuated with those things because that's, in a sense, you know, people south of the border, I can see why you would want to come here. Who wants to be around all that violence? But at the same time, I see why people get involved with cartels because it's a quick way to make a lot of money, because money down there is not like it is here. You know, you don't get paid the amount, you know, and it doesn't go as far. I understand both sides of the equilibrium there. And the sad thing is when you get involved in the drug war, you're not a very long life expectancy.
Right.
No.
You know,
That's hard to get out of too. Once you're in it, you're kind of stuck in it.
Yeah. When you get to reading the history of the landscape down there, it's kind of amazing, because you get the Chinese that are involved coming over long ago, and now, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I'll ask you, you don't have to, but did you want to do a reading at all from this? Give people a little taste of what's going on?
Yeah, I can. Let me turn this light on. I look like I'm in a cave over here. Hopefully that's not too bright.
No, you're good.
Was there any more questions?
Megan.
I think I used up all my smart ones.
Okay.
All your smart ones?
We could definitely end up with a little reading here. Yeah.
So no non-smart questions?
No.
Well, we can
we
ask
can do that.
questions.
We can do that all night long, but you know.
They have all sorts of questions about Christmas vacation. So many questions about Christmas vacation.
I'll let you do your reading, and I do have one more question I'll ask after you do your reading.
Okay. I'm a little dry. Let's see here. Trying not to blind anybody with this light over here. How far do we want to go with this?
So set it up. What part are you going to read so people can?
I'm just going to read from the opening pages.
He's going to read the final page.
The very final page. Let everybody know what happened.
I'm going to read the middle of the book. That's for everybody.
When everybody dies, that's the part he's going to read.
The big twist.
Yeah, big twist. In Miles's world, there was no God. That belief had been destroyed by the vigilance of the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. Sometimes it was the gunfire traveling football fields of distance across rice paddy crops or exploding from the jungle brush that lined the rutted roads of Da Nang. Gunfire that ripped the grunt's brain from his skull as he swept the roads for landmines leading in and out of Hill 37 or Hill 65, a 5-mile trek where explosive devices were constructed of scrapped wood or bamboo, tied together with rope or vine, buried beneath the earth with an oxidized nail touching a blasting cap that, when weighted down by the pressing of a Marine's boot, the trespass of a vehicle, or a tank's heft, metal and human would become one and the same, an explosion that dispersed body parts into unrecognizable shapes. But then there was that other enemy, a host of rogue soldiers that had once trespassed the same territories as Miles, breathed the same air, enjoyed the same freedoms. They were the one memory he tried to keep buried. Some days with booze, other days with iron. On days away from the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, he cruised the county back roads when his irritation level redlined, when it inflamed the memories of a war that to this day still offered more questions than answers. Lance Corporal Miles Knox had been a combat engineer in the U.S. Marine Corps, schooled in demolition, taught how to use TNT and C4. He blew up bridges, traveled by the NVA, destroyed their ammo caches and food supplies, and torched the villages where they were stored and hid. Using C4, he'd mold the gray putty-like explosive, set a blasting cap, packed the plastic explosive on the nose of an unexploded ordnance, cut a length of detonating cord based on how far he could run and yell, "Fire in the hole!" into human dust before he got away. Miles left for Vietnam on December 18th, 1967. His tour of duty was 24 months, 3 Christmases and 3 New Years in Da Nang. His time ended on January 3rd, 1970, but the images and the voices of war still haunted Miles' waking and sleeping hours 34 years later, leaving no good for this man who still conversed with the dead. That was what Miles was doing as the voice of Childers questioned him with, "Gonna make him pay up, Turtle?" Miles felt the shadow of Childers grace him as he grumbled with interest. Standing outside the sheet metal walls of the dirt plant, a night shift factory job he'd worked since the early 80s, landed after the tobacco plant down the street where he'd worked for 10 years folded. He watched strangers appear from the shadows on 13th Street like cockroaches, staggering and stumbling over the pavement at 2 a.m., tilting a paper sack with lights honing their paths. the soles of their shoes dragging and scraping the pavement. Others pushed corroded shopping carts loaded with dented plastic bottles, their hole-worn boots, and ragged blankets they used to live off the streets. They appeared like nocturnal animals, only to disappear back into the stagnation of night. The smell of sewage swelled up from the steam of manhole covers, reminded Miles of how the dead smelled in the denying heat. The rot and spoilage from decomposition, their lost eyes sunken into yellow skin, flies zeroing in on a decomposed landing strip to dump their spores, porous clothing split by the bark of an M16, mortar round, or grenade. Some men took souvenirs, ears, fingers, or scalps. Others posed with the dead, lined them up like cutout paper dolls, saying cheese or singing MICKEYMOUSE and snapping pictures. Not Miles. He dealt with the war day by day, word by word, cracking movie lines from his favorite up-and-coming actor at the time, Clint Eastwood. When in a firefight, Miles always quoted, "You shoot to kill, you better hit the heart." But Miles knew that for those soldiers who severed ears, digits, and scalps, who snapped pictures, that was how some men, dealt with the repercussions of war. They found taking from the decomposed or posing with the breathless to be, in some form, humorous. Not Miles. Other than taking gear, he felt the dead's body parts should be left intact. Why stoop to the level of the inhumane, the cannibalistic? Let the dead be dead, at peace. Truck lights bounced down the city street next to the factory. A barnacled Ford Ranger with a goose-sounding suspension turned into the black-topped area before Miles. The engine killed, a hulking shape weighted down the driver's side, tilted his head back, looked to be sucking down a bottle of water. Through the rolled-down window, Miles heard the mash of plastic thump to the floorboard. The door opened. It was who Miles had been waiting on, his co-worker, Kimball. He owed Miles $600 worth of steroids. He was nearing his next 10-week cycle, needed his juice, his roids. Kimball had faltered on repaying Miles with the vials of Deca and testosterone. Kept telling Miles over and over, "Don't got it tonight. Get you tomorrow, bro." Tomorrow had turned into 2 weeks, and 2 weeks was becoming a blur, and he wasn't nobody's bro. Miles was 57, fighting age, needed his stack, trying to keep his frame as strong and muscular as possible. Each man worked the same job, bringing their wares for coin every week. Miles wondered why one working man would fuck over another, knowing the rigors that each encompassed night after night, sacrificing sleep and health inside of the tin prison that was the factory. He estimated it was part of their generation gap. Older man, coming from an era of earning and offering respect, knowing he was owed nothing, that he had to earn and work his way through life. There was no self-entitlement. The younger generation ignored respect, believed that respect was no longer earned, but given regardless of stature and sacrifice. It was some disillusioned entitlement, wanting to pick and choose what they would or would not do, regardless of a job's responsibilities.
Back to the dirt.
Oh.
May 9th, right?
Yes.
May 9th.
May 9th, yes.
Nice. But I really enjoyed Miles as a character. Like he's like this gruff, very violent, rage-filled dude, but I felt very sorry for him like the whole time too. I don't know, just something about him I really connected with. I could see him being like some people think he's an unlikable character. I don't know. I just felt sorry for him. I really enjoyed him as a character the whole time.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That vanity that he has, like that he needs the steroids and he needs to work out, and like
Yeah.
I know that that's part of processing his trauma and you know that and just surviving, but there's also like this level of not wanting to be old that I think that we can kind of all
connect
with,
to.
you know?
Right. My whole intention was that we're all fighting age.
Yeah,
That's why some people exercise. That's why some people try to eat right. Or eat 90% right, whatever right is, depending on what your blood type is, your body type is, all that type of stuff.
Right.
Everybody's body is different to different types of foods. But yeah, we're all fighting age, rather it be that we walk every day, lift weights every day. We're trying to do things that are better than before,
Yeah.
When I originally first started writing it, the person I kept envisioning in my head was Mickey Rourke because of
Yeah.
I could totally see that now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because of because of the way he looked, and he
Mhm.
was into boxing and things of that nature. But he was
The cover kind of looks a little bit like Mickey Rourke, a little bit, kind of the structure of his face.
yes, it does. But yeah, that's what I kept thinking when I was writing the story.
It's funny, all of us said that too. You said it. We're like, oh yeah, that's what we were thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm picturing him from Sin City. Like, yeah, that's totally Miles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he was like this gentle giant. Like with Shelby, he was really nice and like emotionally opened up. And then next thing you know, he's just beating the pulp out of somebody in the next scene.
Yep, that's Miles. Heart of gold. Until you piss him off.
But I did want to ask you, you reference a lot of music in the book throughout. Is music an influence on your writing? Do you listen to music while you're writing, and does it influence stuff? And
I don't listen to it while I write, but I listen to it like if I'm running, exercising, going for a drive, and it does influence a lot of, because I listen, if I'm lifting weights, it's got to be something just hardcore, completely hardcore. But if I'm going for a run or a walk, or driving to work, other than a podcast, I do listen to a lot of podcasts. Yeah, I do listen to anything from the Drive-By Truckers to Hank Williams Senior. I listen to Johnny Cash. I like to listen to a lot of old country. But what did the Drive-By Truckers fall under? They're alt country. There was a whole era there in the '90s that like Sun Volt, all those guys. I listen to a lot of stuff of that nature. And I love old Delta blues. It's some of my favorite stuff. Yeah.
Jay, did you pick up on all the music throughout? You're
I did.
big on music buff.
Yeah,
He did.
Yeah,
There was no Pearl Jam. There was no Pearl Jam in the book. Though.
I know, but everything else, like Floyd in there and all that
every
stuff.
book I've written, I always use music. My wife and I used to go to a lot of shows, and I used to. On my first book, I'd met Tyler Childers, and we became buddies. And when I first met him, I couldn't believe that he was not popular. I was like, holy crap. I mean, his first album always been my favorite album, Bottles and Bibles. And he actually he had to hitchhike to my reading because he lost his license for DUI one night. My reading, got to meet him and got to hang out and everything. My buddy ended up giving me a ride back to his place. And then years later, connected with Wes Brown, who lives down in Richmond, Kentucky. He wrote Hillbilly Hustle. Yeah, really good guy, really good writer. And I've done some reading at his place, but he knows Tyler too, and we all kind of connected. And he's a big music fan too. He and I talk about music all the time whenever we talk. He has a lot of shows and stuff down at his place. But music's. I think it's something that encompasses a lot of writers. To me, music's my religion. Not to get religious, but music to me is my religion. I got it from my dad. I came down from my dad, and he's 73. To this day, we've been to so many shows together. That's my concert buddy, and I've been going to concerts since I was like 13, and I'm 45 now. So he's with every single one with me. So yeah, that's just music's special, Oh yeah, it gives you a sense of place. It's the background for the filter, what you want to talk about. Right. Yeah. Chris Knight, that's another guy I love. He's a great storyteller. Chris Knight, he's from down in Kentucky. His stuff. If you sit here and talk about music,
I know we could go 5 more hours about music.
Jay could literally go till midnight if you're going to talk about music.
Yeah. I worked in radio too, so like
you have a radio voice. Yeah, you do. I can see that. Yeah.
Not a radio face, though, right?
It is a radio. It is a radio face. It's not a TV face. It's a radio face. That's why I went that route. So,
I do like it when people mention songs in their books like that, though, because it sort of sets the tone for the scene that's kind of going on. Like, kind of go back and you can reread those scenes with the music playing and get a feel for what the characters are doing. Stuff sets a tone for it. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and there's like Kentucky has so many great musicians, and you get down into Texas, Oklahoma, when you get down like Ray Wiley Hubbard and Scott H. Byram, Hayes Carl, all those guys. I've seen all those guys before. They're all. It's just it's like the soundtrack for what I'm writing. Basically. I know Tarantino has always talked about that when he sits down to write a new script. He always sits down and listens to different types of music. I don't necessarily do that. It's something I always think, like Waylon Jennings. That was when I think of Waylon Jennings, I think of Miles. That's a whiskey drinker that's cruising the back roads and smoking his cigarettes, and thinking about lifting weights, or he's already lifted weights. Not that drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes is going to help you any, but that's where the steroids
Right.
or extra edge.
Pumping iron. So,
Canceling himself out. That's why he's got to do the roids. He's got to get on that positive side.
Definitely.
Bench pressing with just the cigarette hanging out the lip there.
Yeah, definitely ash.
Nice. Definitely. Well, Frank, we can't thank you enough for joining us this evening.
Hey, I can't thank you enough for having me. It's been a great time. I enjoyed it.
So, any parting words from our special co-host? We had to invite royalty tonight.
Royalty, my
Megan, we got to shout out Megan's books. Megan, her debut novel, Songbirds and Stray Dogs, is fantastic. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, you need to check it out.
Yes, definitely.
And then
definitely
she's got.
Thank you.
This isn't the real cover, but upcoming from Shotgun Honey, she's got a short story collection coming out in July.
In July, yeah, it's exciting.
There's a story in here about eyeballs. Skip over that one and read the other ones and forget about the eyeball one.
If Ron Earl Phelps is listening, he needs to send me an advance copy so I can read it.
He was in here earlier.
Yeah,
I'm
he
pretty
was
sure that was in
here.
the chat.
Yeah.
We'll get you a copy, Frank.
I think he's on. I think he's in vacation. I think he's in Hawaii right now with his wife, and he's in here in the chat watching this.
Did he travel all the way out west? Can't remember.
I think they went somewhere like Hawaii or
they went to
California
Hawaii for their anniversary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. I did see that. Yeah. And additionally, I mean, Megan may have something that's needing a home. Just if anybody's listening.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I my agent has a novel that she can't sell.
Yeah.
It's because they don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
Meagan Lucas should be an instant purchase.
She knows what she knows what she's doing, but I guess
Brad, don't get her in trouble. She's going to.
That didn't mean the agent. I mean the people
on Twitter looking for a new agent.
Yeah.
I meant the people.
Thanks,
the publishers don't know what they're missing out because they're not buying it. The agent's doing a good job.
Okay.
It just takes time.
Frank, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. I mean, we're two dopes with microphones. Sometimes we get lucky, have a co-host with us, but it's an honor to have you here and just chat for hour and a half, hour 45 minutes. So thanks so much for hanging out with us and not turning those off right away and leaving.
Connection issues. Oh no, gosh, I gotta go.
Yeah, really. Like
when you started with Goodreads,
like a fake freeze.
Yeah, Jay, the 4 minutes of the show, negative reviews.
He knew what I was talking about because I saw it today.
He's like, oh no, it's storming. My power's going out, guys. I'm sorry.
See, now you know it's all natural. I mean, nothing's rehearsed, right?
No, absolutely nothing is rehearsed on this show.
For that gentleman, I would have to give the Larry Brown quote. I'd like to walk a mud hole in your ass and walk it dry. Stomp a mud hole in your ass. And walk it dry. That's from Big Bad Love. Yeah. But
that's it. This is May 9th.
Real quick. May 9th. And
May
you
9th.
have you have a release party. Is that May 9th, the release party? With
we're doing Carmichael's Books.
Shout that out real quick.
Carmichael's Bookstore. And then May the 11th, we're doing one in my hometown. Yeah, Ashley Irwin will be there.
Is the after party at Beef O'Brady's? Is that what I heard?
No, that's the 11th.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the 11th. That's
it's got a fancy poster.
Ooh, pretty.
I know it's all backwards. You gotta go the other way. There's Ashley.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So if you pick up this one, you can set it next to all of the others, right?
Mm-hmm.
May 9th.
Next to your Frank Bill collection on your bookshelf.
Right. Yeah. May 9th, we're going to be at Carmichael's. I'll be there with Kyle Miner in conversation, and then
that's in Louisville, right?
Yeah, that's in Louisville, Kentucky, on Frankfurt Avenue, and then May the 11th, we'll be at Gordon, Indiana, at Beef O'Brady's. Me and Ashley.
And Butcher Cabin Books is going to be at Beef O'Brady's too, right?
Butcher Cabin Books is going to be there. Yes.
Sweet.
Yes. Yeah.
Making your rounds. Is this a lot of out doing promotional things? Is this something different, or
no?
Did you just last one too, or
the only difference now? I usually do something at Beef O'Brady's. My buddy used to own it, so it was a little bit easier as far as because he always took care of a lot more of the technical stuff. I've been a lot more technical this time, but the managers there know me, and they're very sweet. They help promote too. I'm just doing a little extra stuff. So yeah,
that's cool.
It's not been bad at all.
That's cool.
And then the Oklahoma thing, I got asked in advance to do that, to come speak to some of the writers there. And then down in Mississippi, a guy named Cody, he's wanted me to come down there for years. So we made it work this time. So I got to meet him and everything. Had a really good time. Backer Mountain Radio. And then there's some other stuff I've got to do. Sporadically, there's some other bookstores and things I'll be doing around the area. So, yeah.
Well,
Very
great.
cool.
It's been a pleasure. You're a great storyteller. Like I was just in a trance most of the night.
I love it when we don't have to talk much.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the guest just talks the whole time. Those are the best shows. Those are always the best.
I can get in a rabbit hole really quick.
And we could listen the entire time.
I appreciate it. Trust me, I've been on some other podcasts I've never even talked about because things really went south quick, and I just sat there and didn't say a word. Like, what are people talking about? It's crazy. But I've listened to your all show, so I knew, you guys read the books and know what you're talking about.
It didn't scare them away. So
No.
That says we really appreciate you listening
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
You guys
do.
do a good job. I try to repost when I can.
Yeah.
Social media is one of those things, man. I hate getting on it, but you have to kind of be on it when you're trying to promote stuff.
Yeah.
At times, yeah. So for our special guest, Frank Bill, for our special co-host, Meagan Lucas, that's Brad over that way. I'm Jay. Thanks everyone in the chat for joining us this evening. We appreciate it. And of course, this the replay of this will be everywhere. Brad's channel, my channel, Paper Cuts Live, website, Twitter,
all the podcasts you can find.
Podcasting. Yeah. So, all right. Until next time, everyone stay safe.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
Jay.
Glad
Go
you
back to the dirt, my night. Go got it.
Thanks. Appreciate it, guys.